You've heard the buzz about AI agents, automation, and no code. But how do you actually build automations in 2025? I'm going to show you guys how to use N8N in this video. I'm going to assume you don't have any knowledge of coding, automation, or any of that stuff. I'm going to go over the absolute basics, explain the concepts in detail, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a very solid foundation to go and build the automations of your dreams. My name's Tommy Eberly. Welcome back to the channel. Let's get into this video. All right, before we get into the tutorial, we have to talk about hosting. Now with N8N, you have the option to either use their cloud-based plan, which you can see right here. I have the pricing page open. With the cloud-based plan, you're gonna be paying a monthly fee. Everything's gonna be running on N8N servers. And to be honest, for the vast majority of you watching this video, I would recommend just signing up for the free trial of the starter plan and not worrying about it. But I will mention the other option with N8N is to self-host. And what this means is if you can actually rent your own servers or even on your laptop, you can run an instance of N8N, work on workflows, and actually have full access to basically all the features that you'd get in the cloud hosted plan. So you might be wondering, well, if it's free to do that on my laptop, if it's free to do that, why wouldn't I do that over just paying N8N a monthly fee? And the honest answer is, yeah, it's true that it's technically free or a lot cheaper in terms of monetary cost. But if you don't have a lot of programming experience and if you haven't configured a lot of software like this before, it's just going to be a gigantic pain in the butt. And you're much better off, especially if you're a beginner to this kind of stuff, in my opinion, just paying the $25 a month and getting competent at the tool. Because if you have to learn not only how N8N works in detail, starting from scratch, but also how to host it, how to run it in the cloud, how to deal with Docker and some of these more advanced tech concepts, I think it's just going to be realistically overwhelming. So unless you're into that kind of thing, or unless you have the programming background necessary to where that's not a problem, I would highly, highly recommend you just get the cloud plan. Okay, great. With that out of the way, let's actually go into N8N. And what we're actually looking at here is my N8N instance. And again, this is the cloud-based plan. And I'm just going to walk through some of the main things on the UI. On the left-hand side, you've got the overview. So the overview is going to show you all your workflows, some that are shared with you. You're going to get access to credentials in here, and we'll go over that later. But basically, this is a bunch of different services that you might have signed into and given N8N access to. You get access to executions. So when you run a workflow, you're going to see an instance of that workflow here, and we'll explain what that means later. We also have the option to create the workflow, and there's also a concept of projects. So one of the weird gotchas with N8N is, yes, you're allowed to invite other people to your instance, and you guys can share workflows and collaborate. But by default, if you're just in the personal view and you hit create workflow, that's not going to be visible to anyone else in your organization or your company unless you explicitly go and share the workflow. That's really annoying, honestly. So the other option is to create what's called a project, and everything in a project. So you can see I have this project here for Revise, my company here. Anything in a project is going to be visible to all of the users that are available in that project. And what I mean by that is if you're the admin, so I am the admin here, so that's whoever created the account, you actually have to go into project settings and invite another user. So this is just something that I've run into a few times working with organizations. Basically, you need to make sure that everybody is invited to the project. You need to make sure that everybody is actually creating workflows within the project, and then you'll actually be able to save everything. And also credentials. Credentials need to be shared in the projects as well. So anyway, that's just a brief overview of that. Let's hit on create workflow. And this is going to bring us into the brand new workflow screen. So this is what you get when you are starting from absolute scratch with N8N. And we're going to go ahead and click this plus button that is kind of goading us into clicking here. And what we need to add, as with any workflow, is what's called a trigger. So to start, let's just go ahead and do trigger manually. This is probably the most straightforward trigger, not one that's often used in a production context, but it's going to be perfect for what we're doing here. Now you'll notice, once we have that trigger, we have the option now to execute the workflow. So workflows are a series of what are called nodes. So we would say this is the manual trigger node. And when we have a node here, we can click on the settings for the node over here. That's these little three dots. You can hit open. And within a node, we have a few different things. These are a lot of them are going to be node specific. Some of them are going to be common to each of the nodes. So in terms of node specific, we're not getting a ton here because this is just the manual trigger. I'll explain some more details about node-specific fields later. But one of the options that you're going to have with any node in N8N is the option to rename it. So if we click out of this and we notice how it says when clicking execute workflow, we can rename this to say, start workflow. And this is going to make more sense later. But basically, this allows us to organize our thoughts. This is going to help, especially as we start to add more and more nodes. It's helpful to name them something useful. So we're going to go ahead and just name this start workflow. And if you want to delete the node, you can do that with the garbage can icon here. And if you didn't want to delete that, you can hit Command Z or Control Z if you're on Windows, and you're going to get some semblance of, copy and paste history. So be careful about that. The other thing is we want to be careful about saving the workflow. So if I go back to personal, you'll notice that it's going to prompt me and say, hey, do you want to save your changes before leaving? So if I hit leave without saving, you're going to notice that no workflow actually got created, and we're going to have to start over. So we're going to go back, hit trigger manually. Now let's hit save. And now you're going to notice that it successfully created the workflow, so that looks good. And then if we go back to personal, we're going to see that we got the workflow here. It's called My Workflow. So let's go ahead and rename this. We're just going to call this N8N tutorial. And again, be very careful, because if you add like any other node here and you just like go out of the tab, Chrome is going to warn you. Be very, very careful. It is extremely easy to lose your work in N8N doing this kind of thing. So I know it seems a little boring. I know it seems like I'm kind of nagging you to do this, but you do want to be saving as much as you possibly can. And you do want to be very, very careful about getting rid of your tabs and about clearing the state on Chrome. So that's a trigger, and also notice here that the name that I gave this trigger was completely cleared. So let's go ahead and rename this to just Start Workflow. So we're going to name this Start Workflow. And we're going to want to actually add a step. So the trigger is just what's going to start the workflow. So in the case of a manual trigger, we actually need to click this button that says Execute Workflow. And you'll notice that when I click this button, the node turns to green, which signifies that it actually ran. Well, there's actually a bunch of different triggers. So if we type in trigger here, we're going to notice that there's chat trigger. We're going to see error trigger. We're going to see, let's see, Facebook trigger, Eventbrite trigger. So basically, you can configure the workflow to start on a bunch of different criteria. So for instance, maybe the Facebook trigger, like anytime you got a Facebook message or anytime there was a new post, that would actually cause the workflow to start. So we're going to just use test trigger here, or excuse me, trigger manually. That's totally cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to fetch a bunch of data from a Google Sheet. So I prepared this Google Sheet over here. It's a bunch of dummy contact data. I had ChatGPT generate this entire spreadsheet. We've got names, emails, phone numbers, that kind of stuff. And what we want to do is access this data in N8N and maybe write to it, branch out, read from it, maybe do some AI kind of stuff. So what we're going to do is now we're going to look for Google Sheets. So in the search here, you could just go into Action and App, and you'd probably be able to scroll down and look for Google Sheets. I prefer to just type in Sheets. That search feature is very nice. You can go into Google Sheets here. And what we're going to want to do is get rows in a sheet. So based on the type of application you're interfacing with, there probably is a built-in connector or node. So if we look here again, we have a lot of different stuff. We've got Appify, that one's new. We've got AWS, we've got cal.com. A lot of applications that you'd want to integrate with are already supported. And you'll notice, like for instance, if I click on, I don't know, Google Ads, we're going to see stuff like get many campaigns, get a campaign. And if we type on Google Sheets, we're going to see stuff like create a sheet, clear sheet, delete a sheet. This is just to illustrate to you guys that the node that you select is going to dictate the type of actions and triggers that are available. And notice down here that it's separating actions and triggers. So triggers are what's going to cause a workflow to start running in the first place. So if we go down to triggers, we're going to see stuff like on row added, on row updated, on row added or updated. So basically that could allow us to create a workflow, and maybe we'll do this later, where anytime a new piece of data gets added to the spreadsheet, it's actually going to go and cause the N8N workflow to trigger. But because we're using the manual trigger here, we are actually going to ignore the triggers, and what we're going to do is get the rows in a sheet. So you can break down nodes into two different types. We've talked about the triggers. Now we're going to talk about the regular nodes. And you'll notice that when I add this node, so we're going to go ahead and delete this. When you click on this plus icon to the right of a given node, and let's type in Sheets again, so we're going to go into Google Sheets, and we're going to do get rows in a sheet. Notice that visually, we're now seeing this connection. And if I drag around the Google Sheets node, we're going to see this little arrow follow it anywhere I go. That's because these nodes are now connected. And what that means is when I first run the trigger node, that's going to turn green. And then it is going to go and run the Google Sheets node afterwards. And it's also going to pass data in between the nodes if that's an option. So with the manual trigger, there is no data. But with Google Sheets, we'll see what I mean when I say we're going to pass data. So let's open this guy up. And what we need to do first is actually use a credential, because of course Google Sheets, I have different sheets than you have. Like it's scoped to my Google account. So what you're going to want to do is actually go in here, and I've already connected here, but for the vast majority of nodes, you're going to be able to just sign in. So luckily the Google node, you just hit sign in with Google. It's honestly just like you would sign in to Google with any other third-party application. You've probably done this before, so I'm not going to demonstrate it, but that's going to sign in. And notice that you can name the credentials. So I'd actually decide to rename this like Tommy's Google Sheets. That's going to come in handy later. Like if you have multiple people on an organization using N8N and both of you are signed into different accounts, you're going to want to name these something easy to use because you'll notice that there's a drop down and you can select the user that you want to be authenticated with. Now, in terms of resource and operation, so all of this stuff we're seeing here is completely specific to the Google Sheets node. Like you could imagine if I was connecting to, I don't know, HubSpot, I wouldn't necessarily need to sign into Google, and I wouldn't necessarily be talking about Sheets. That is an application-specific concept, and that's why we're seeing it in the middle here. And again, I also want to highlight that we can rename this node. So I can name this like Fetch Contacts. So now if I go out here, we see Fetch Contacts. That's a little more descriptive than just Google Sheets. And you're going to see why that also comes in handy later because we might do other things with Google Sheets. Anyway, we're going to want to grab a sheet within a document because as you recall with Google Sheets, this is called the sheet and then this is called the document. So we want to grab the dummy contact CSV data sheet out of the contact data documents. So let's go back into N8N and what we're going to do is choose a document from the list. So we're going to go ahead and what we're going to see here is contact data. So that's going to correspond to this document. And then you'll notice that the sheets, we're going to see a drop down as well, and that's going to automatically populate. And again, if you're not sure what sheet it's referring to, luckily this node is configured to give you this little link so you can click on that. So let's go ahead and do dummy contact CSV data. And now you're going to notice there's a bunch of filters. So we're not going to do that right now, but what we do want to do is actually execute the step. So let's execute the step, and you're going to notice that now on the right-hand side, we have our first output. And this output is going to have 50 items. Before we get into that, I want to actually showcase what the workflow looks like now. And basically what we have is the first step is the trigger. Then we have Google Sheets, and both of these are green because both of them succeeded. Now notice that the trigger here is going to have 1 item, and the Google Sheets is going to have 50 items. So every node in N8N is going to have some amount of output items. It could be 0, it could be 1, it could be 1,000. That is going to depend on what the node is doing, but there's always going to be this concept of output of a node. So this has 1 item, this has 50 items, and I'll explain what we're going to do with those 50 items later, but let's actually open up this node and go through what's going on. And another little trick is you can resize these windows here, and so in our case here, I want to get more space on the right-hand side, so that's what we want to look at. So we have schema, table, JSON. We also have the search option. We're going to go through all this. But basically, this should look pretty similar because this is the exact same data that we had in our contact data spreadsheet. And you're going to notice here that we also get this row number column. So in Google Sheets, I don't actually see a column that says row number, but because we're getting that returned, that's why it says row_number. And the Google Sheets node is going to strip away the top row. So the header with all the column names is present, but that's not something that we're going to be able to access directly as its own row, and that's why the data starts at row number 2, even though in the spreadsheet, row number 1 here actually has the header. So that is specific to Google Sheets. Now let's go through. Again, we've got all the columns. I think there are 10 columns in total, plus the row number is going to be 11. We can page through everything. That's all pretty straightforward, I imagine. Now, there's different ways to represent this data. So if we go into schema, we're going to get a slightly different view, and you're going to notice that we see 50 items, but now we are only seeing 1 row. And what's interesting about the schema is we get the exact same data that we see in the table, but we also get the types of the data. Now in N8N and actually in programming in general, you can't just have a piece of data without a type. And what I mean by that is if you see row number, we get this little pound sign that's indicating to us that it is a number type. The rest of them, except for zip code, have this capital A, which is going to be a string type. Now, don't worry too much about this, but numbers are going to be, standard numbers. So 2, 1.6, -1 million. Those are all numbers. Strings are going to be any pieces of text. And then there's also Booleans, which are going to be true and false. We'll get into those. And there's some other types as well, but numbers and strings are good to start out with for now. Now, the reason we have different types, and that's going to come into play later, is going to deal with operations. You could say that the number 2 is less than the number 3 because that's a numerical operation, less than. But that wouldn't really make sense to say that Stephen is less than Morris, or at least in the same way that we would do that with numbers. So that's why we have different types when we're comparing data. That's going to happen differently based on the type of the data. You have to be comparing apples to apples for the most part. So anyway, this is the schema output. Now we also have the scary JSON output. Now I have another video where I go into detail with this, and I go into detail with the HTTP node, which we're not going to be covering in this video. But basically JSON is a programmatic way to represent the data. And what I mean by that is if we are trying to communicate this data and we're trying to communicate it to a computer, we need a very structured way to represent all of the rows. So if we take a look at this JSON object, and this would be called an object, it's going to start with this open bracket, and this is going to tell us that it is an array. Now, an array is going to be a list of items, and I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you guys, but we have a JSON array here, and it's got 50 items. And what are the items? Well, we have, this is the first item. We have, this is the second item. Actually, I'm on page 3, so this is the 22nd item, the 23rd. Let's go back to page 1. So this is the first item with row number 2. This is the second item with row number 3. And notice that this JSON object, so we have a few different levels of objects. So we have the big object that contains 50 sub-objects. And then we have the first sub-object is going to contain all of the data that's present in the table. And on the left-hand side, we have what are called keys. So we would say this is the row number key. This is the first space name key. This is the last space name key. And on the right-hand side, we have values. And values are associated with a key. So we could say the first object within the JSON array has a value of Susan Solomon at hotmail.com for the email key. And that's how we would talk about this data, and that's how we would do it in a way that's very specific. And this is going to make the computer's life a lot easier. So JSON is basically something that you need to know if you want to be effective at N8N. This is at a high level what's going on. We just have a different representation of the data. It is the exact same that we're seeing in the table. It is the exact same that we're seeing in the schema. It's just looking a little different. So that's what JSON is. We can page through it. It's, again, the exact same stuff. So we have keys, zip code, 57533. And again, when I was talking about the types, notice how James, it's in purple and we have these double quotes, whereas row number, we don't need the quotes and it's in green. That is exactly the same as why we see this pound sign here, and this capital A here. That is N8N trying to tell us that the types are different. And in JSON, the rules are a little different. So for numbers, you don't need the double quotes. For strings, you do. You probably won't be creating a ton of your own JSON objects, at least to get started, but it's not that scary. It's just a way of representing data in a very structured format in a way that's a little easier to understand for the computer than like taking a screenshot of Google Sheets. Okay, so that's JSON. Let's actually go and do something with this data. I think what I want to do is run an OpenAI chat completion. Now, you guys have probably seen in N8N, you can send off AI requests and do some fancy stuff. So maybe what we're going to do is I think clean up the phone number, because if we look here, the phone number just looks really bad. Like I didn't actually even tell ChatGPT to do this when it generated the data, but the phone number just looks awful. Like I want to clean up. I don't know what's going on here. I don't really like it, so I'm gonna have AI clean up the phone number. And what I mean by that is like if we went into, like let's copy and paste this, let's go into ChatGPT. I could say, clean up this phone number here. And it's gonna go ahead and like strip away this nonsense. Yeah, okay, cool. So it's gonna just do this. And I'm gonna have ChatGPT do that for me so I don't have to deal with like all of this bad data. And that's a very common thing you would do with AI technology. So let's go back into N8N. And notice that we have 50 items here. That is going to come in handy shortly. But in terms of AI usage, AI is definitely like the hottest feature in N8N. If we go into the AI column, you're going to be greeted immediately with the AI agent. I don't recommend you use this, at least for simple things. There are some cool instances where the AI agent is the right choice. For the majority of cases, honestly, it's not. Instead, what I would recommend is go straight to OpenAI and go to message a model. This is my preferred way to interact with ChatGPT for the vast majority of cases. I think it's simpler than AI agent. There's less things that can go wrong, and you don't have to worry about stuff like tool calling for the most part. It's just a simpler node than the AI agent, and it doesn't tempt you to make the thing really complicated, use a bunch of tools that aren't needed. And because we have a very straightforward use case here, like I just want to send one chat completion, I want to grab the phone number, and I want to parse it out into a new column in the Google Sheet, this is absolutely perfect. So let's go ahead and we're going to do a credential here. I'm going to create a new one so I can show you guys what needs to happen here, but we're going to need what's called an API key. Now we're going to go ahead and hit create new credential. And we're going to call this, N8N tutorial. So with Google, luckily you were able to just sign in and everything just works. So that was hopefully very straightforward. With OpenAI, you need what's called an API key. So for OpenAI, you would basically need to go in and create an account on their API platform. So if you have a ChatGPT subscription, that is not the same as the API usage. Now, I have a video that I made a while back going over the billing differences between ChatGPT and the OpenAI API. But basically, if you want to integrate AI into your application like this, you're going to get billed as if you were pumping gas in your car or as if you were using electricity at your house. Basically, billed on usage. So the more you use, the more text you're sending it, you're going to get billed accordingly. And that differs from ChatGPT, where you just pay a monthly subscription and you get semi-unlimited usage. But basically what we're going to do here is once you have your account created, once you have your credit card thrown down, you're going to need to add some money onto the account. You're going to do what's called create a new secret key. And we're going to call this N8N tutorial. And we're going to give it all permissions for now. Hit create secret key. And then notice that it's going to give you this like nasty looking thing. This is the API key. And basically, this is a token that you're going to paste into N8N. And then when N8N makes requests to OpenAI, OpenAI is going to see that token and go, ah, that was Tommy. That was Tommy. So this token basically authenticates you, and you're going to paste it in here. Now, this is a sensitive piece of data because if I sent you this token, and by the way, best practice, I'm going to delete this because I don't even want you guys to see this, but if anyone has your token, they can impersonate you. They can rack up a gigantic bill. So be careful with this. Hit save. That should go ahead and authenticate. You're going to see, yes, that tested successfully. And that is going to enable us now to actually go in and start sending chat completions. And when I say chat completion, by the way, I mean send a message to a model and get a response. That is sometimes called a chat completion. So what do we want to do? So first we're going to do a prompt. Actually, first we're going to pick the model. And of course, this is everybody's favorite part of OpenAI is it is kind of a nightmare, to pick the model. We're just going to pick GPT 4.0, which is the standard model. It's going to be plenty good for this. And what we need to do here is have it output a phone number because that's what we want to use. So we're going to say, we're going to start prompting here. And what I'm going to do is break this up into a system and a user prompt. I'll explain what that means in a second, but basically I'm just going to go ahead and type this out. So we're going to do system prompts. So I've gotten the first part of the prompt here, and I'll read it out loud for you guys. It says, you will be given a phone number. The phone number might have an extension or otherwise need to get cleaned up. I want you to output the cleaned phone number in this format. And actually, let's fix this up slightly. Output only the phone number and nothing else. So basically, I'm telling the AI, you're going to be my phone number cleaning assistant. And basically, I just want you to output this. And very clearly, I also only want the phone number and nothing else. And we'll explain why in a second. But basically, if we go to ChatGPT and say clean up this phone number, you'll notice that it gives us this little preamble. I don't want that if I'm going to put it into a spreadsheet. So let's go back into the N8N tutorial. That is going to be the system message because we are setting the stage for what the assistant is going to do. And then we're going to add the message, the user message. And now this is where the schema is going to come in handy. So what we can do here is if we're in table mode, again, we just view the data. If we're in JSON mode, again, we just see the JSON representation of the data. But once you're working with using inputs from previous nodes into a future node, what you're going to want to use is the schema. And so we're going to go on the left-hand side, and we're going to grab this phone here, and we can just drag it in. And we're going to put it into the prompt. And we're going to notice here that we get this scary-looking syntax. So a few things actually happen. So let's back up for a second. So first of all, one of the things we could do is we could have just filled this in. So I could have just put in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, blah, blah, blah. And that would have worked. And then we could go ahead and execute step. But that's what's called hard coding. And what I mean by that is this doesn't depend on the input data at all. This is just like a random phone number I put in there. And what we want to do is actually have this depend on the input data. So when you're you'll notice that we're in the fixed mode. We can just type in whatever. We can add in special characters, and it's just going to be completely normal. As we drag in the data, so we're going to go into phone, and notice the second what happens when I drag this in, this gets flipped to expression, and now it's telling us that anything inside the brackets is JavaScript. And basically what's happening here is N8N under the hood is running a lot of JavaScript. And when we're connecting nodes and when we're passing data along, really what we're doing under the hood is manipulating JavaScript code that N8N is going to run on our behalf. But they have this nice interface. And so what that means is when you drag in the phone number into the prompt field here, it is going to convert that to JavaScript. And that's what we're seeing within the brackets. So this $JSON.phone, that is what is happening there. And if we actually look, what that kind of means is $JSON is going to be the particular object. And if we back up again, we have 50 objects here. Let's delete this. We have 50 outputs here. So let's actually connect these guys. We have 50 outputs of fetch contacts. So when I was talking about there's a number of outputs, what that means is in the OpenAI node, this is going to run not once, this is going to run 50 times. And it's going to run once for each item in the JSON array. And so when we do $JSON.phone, what that means is for this object, or for whatever object is currently there, grab the phone field, and that's why in the little preview we are seeing 885-310, blah, 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 whatever, Steven's phone number here. This is going to run 50 times, and each time it's going to grab this guy, then it's going to run again, it's going to grab this guy, then it's going to run again and grab this guy, then it's going to run again and grab this guy, blah, 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 and then it's going to output 50 items. So that's what's going on there, and I don't mean to scare you when I'm talking about code and JavaScript. It's totally fine if you don't know what that means, but I want to illustrate what's going on a little bit under the hood. And I want to illustrate the fact that when you drag stuff in, it's not really magic. So let's go. That should be good. There's a bunch of other options. Again, these are going to be specific to the node. So if we go back out of OpenAI and we go back into Google Sheets, all these options are different. And all these items are different because in this node, we're dealing with Google Sheets and grabbing data. Whereas in this node, we are dealing with sending AI messages to ChatGPT and getting responses. So of course, all of this stuff is going to be different here. And there is a settings panel. This is going to be something that's standard on all of the nodes. We're not going to get into that today, but depending on what you're doing with the workflow, that might come in handy. So let's go ahead and run this guy basically. So let's go ahead and execute step. And this will take a second because again, I am sending 50 chat completions. This should be relatively parallelized. Let's give it a second here. It's going to go ahead and execute the node. And I don't know what happened here. Do I need to cast this? Okay, what's going on? Okay, so I think we got our first error, and you'll notice what happens on the right-hand side. We're going to get bad request. This error message is coming from OpenAI. This is, well, N8N is giving us the error message, but really it's just telling us, hey, the node failed, and this is what the node said went wrong. So this is not really like an N8N error. So what's going on is we actually need to make sure that this is a string. So again, this is where types are going to come in handy. I think what's happening is some of our data, if we look over here, let's actually just go here. In the phone number column, this is getting interpreted as a string, not a number. So we need to cast this as a string. So what we can do is actually go in here and do JSON.stringify and then this guy. And I think this will work. Yeah, let's go ahead and execute this. So this is, again, some JavaScript. Basically what I'm doing is I'm forcing N8N. I'm saying, hey, I don't care what you thought the data was. It is a string. So that's why you got to be careful with your types. I don't mean to do this to scare you guys. Hopefully this will work. Shouldn't take too much longer. Let's see what happens. Okay, any second now. You can get out of this and notice that we have the executing workflow is in orange here. That is still running. Yeah, 50 completions. This will take a second. And don't worry, I'll explain in a bit later how to make this run faster, especially when you're testing. But for now, let's let it just do its thing, and hopefully we actually get a response. All right, cool. So we finally got the response. If we're going to notice here, we actually got 50 items. So again, 50 items coming out of Google Sheets, 50 items coming out of OpenAI. Oh, and by the way, I never even renamed this guy. So let's name this clean phone number. And again, that's going to be helpful because now if we go out here, this says clean phone number. 50 items are being output. Now, you're going to notice that we get more than just the phone number. We get index, we get message. So this is coming from, again, OpenAI. And so basically what that means is when you do message a model, the shape of the output data is actually what we're seeing here, and it's this JSON object. Don't worry too much about, role and all of this stuff. But basically what that means is, like now if we go into Google Sheets, and we click here, and we go update row in a sheet, for instance, you're going to notice that if we go to schema, I have access to all that data. I can drag in the contents, basically. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to go and update that phone number. So we're going to, again, grab the sheet from the documents. We're going to go to contact data, and we know our sheet is like the dummy contact, whatever it was called. And then now we have to actually map the column. So it's saying map each column manually. So each of these things here, you're going to recognize that from our Google Sheet here. So first name, last name, email, phone. What we are going to do is actually delete all of them because the only one I want to update is phone. And then what I'm going to do is drag in the content here, and that should work here. So let's go ahead and execute step. That is executing node. And if we give this a second to go, okay, that failed. Column to match on is required. Oh, okay, column to match on. So yes, we have a problem here, and it's that basically we've lost the ability to map between the pieces of data. Now, I can see here that, okay, Stephen Morris, Robert Sharp. So if I was just like dictating this to you, I could say, hey, update Stephen's phone number to 885-310, whatever, that would work. But if we take a look here, like nowhere in the OpenAI output do we have that row number. So we need a way to link this phone number back to row number 2 or Stephen Morris because we've kind of forgotten that at this point. So the Google Sheets node is complaining and saying, hey, you need to match on a column. So what we're going to do is we are going to select row number as the column to match on. And what that means is we're going to supply a row number and a phone number. And we're going to say for row number 2, update the phone to this. For row number 8, update the phone to this. You could use a different column. You could use email and say, hey, for email, SusanSolomon@hotmail.com, update the phone number to this. Or for pmartin@gardner.com, update the phone number for this. But that's less unique than the row number because you could honestly have a situation where the same email appears multiple times or the same state or whatever. Whereas the row number, there's only ever going to be one row number 2. But where do we get the row number? Well, if we look on the left-hand side in our inputs, we don't just have access to the input from the OpenAI node. We actually have access to our inputs from the fetch context node, and it's actually linked up. So even though there's 50 output items for fetch context and 50 output items for OpenAI, it's able to like kind of line those up and understand that like the first output from the Google Sheets node is going to correspond to the first output from the OpenAI node. So what that means is we are seeing here the linked up data. So this is Steven's row, and this is his OpenAI output. So what we're going to do is going to drag that row number in here, and this should now work. And let's hit execute step. That's going to go ahead. Hopefully this works for you guys. I hope I'm not making too many API requests. Yes, that looks good. And if we go into our spreadsheet, look at that. All the data is cleaned, and it looks pretty nice. I'm not going to lie. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and talk about a few other things before we finish up this video here. So again, let's go ahead and save this. Now that we save this, we can go back to personal. We see N8N tutorial. We can now click into this guy, and we're going to notice that all of our stuff is here. So what if you wanted to see a history of all the times this had ran? Well, that's what the executions tab is for. So you can go ahead and click on executions, and we're going to see all of the different times that I ran this workflow. So we can see that the last time I ran it, it succeeded in 3 seconds. There was a time where I ran it and it errored out. All of that is visible here, and we can see, yeah, that was the error here. If you want to debug what was going on, you can click on one of these executions, so it failed here, and click debug in editor. And you're going to notice that it just took all of that data and put it back into our workflow. So now if we open up these nodes, we're going to see the data is there. And if we open up these nodes, we're going to actually see the error message that was caused. So this is, again, the same error message that I was just complaining about. And so let's go back to personal. Actually, it's going to prompt you to save. So we're going to go ahead and leave without saving. Let's go back into N8N tutorial. And when you just click on your workflow, everything is going to be gray, which means there's no data. So if I open this up here, there is no data. If I open this guy up here, there is no data. Let's run this again, and I want to talk about testing and how to test as fast as you can. So we recall that testing this workflow was really annoying because this step is slow. Like, I have to call it to OpenAI. And actually, not only is it slow, but I'm paying. So I love you guys so much that I'm actually willing to spend API tokens. I'm willing to spend money just to make a tutorial. But in all seriousness, this is going to cost some money. This is going to take some time. And if like I made a change here, for instance, like, oh shoot, I had the wrong row number and I have to run this entire workflow, then that means I make one little change and I have to wait like 60 seconds to see if it actually worked and pay like 10 cents. That's might not seem like much. And if you only have to ever do it one time, that's kind of fine. Like, you can get away with that. But honestly, that's such a waste of time. That's making things really slow, and it's just not fun. And if you want to be effective at developing workflows, you want to be able to work as fast as possible and test as diligently as possible. So now this is done. There's a few different options here. So step number one, if we were testing the update, so let's say we were trying to debug that error, one of the things you can do is just click execute step, and that is going to only execute that step. That's fine. As your workflows get more complicated, that might not become as viable as an option, and you'll kind of see why that becomes the case. But you could just execute a single step. But if we go back here and now we execute this step, we're going to notice that that actually clears out the data for all of the future steps. So that's going to be a problem. So it's fine if you want to test like that last step, you can go ahead and do that. But if you want to test a step in the back and then go forward, like now we're in the same situation where I have to run through the OpenAI node a bunch of times. So there is another option. You could add what's called a limiter. So there's a node called limits, and that is going to restrict the number of items. And you're going to notice that this is max items. So I could say like 5 here, and if I execute this, the output is 5. And again, that's going to be the first 5 items here. Let's just do 1. So we're going to output 1 item. And the reason I'd want to do that is, well, this is kind of the same workflow if it's 100 or 1,000 or 2 or 1. Like, it doesn't really matter. But 1 item runs a lot faster than 50 items. So now you're going to see if I execute this workflow, it's probably going to run about 50 times faster. So that's another option, is you can limit the data. You do want to be careful with this though, because if you don't forget to delete this before you enable this to prod, then you're going to have a problem. So like if I go ahead and save this, and now I have my workflow here, well, that limit is still there. So we don't want that. Let's go ahead and save that. So let's go ahead, and we're not going to execute this again, but now I'm going to explain the probably best thing you need to know for testing, and it's called pinning data. So let's go ahead and grab some data from a previous execution. So it's going to be this one that was 4 seconds. Let's see. No, that was just the 1 item. Where was the one that was a little longer? Oh, 48 seconds. Yes, so this is the one that actually did all 50 items. Let's go ahead and copy to editor. and it's going to say execution data is imported. So again, we have this here. Let's say, so in this case, the real issue with this workflow is that the ChatGPT step is just really slow and it costs me money. So what I really want to do is be able to test all this workflow, but not make that call to ChatGPT again. Like I kind of want to just save that data and pretend as if I had made that call already. And that's what the pin feature allows you to do. So let's zoom in. What you're going to do is you're going to grab that 3 little dots and you're going to hit pin. And now we're going to notice that this is turned into purple. And if we click on this, we're going to see that it's pinned. And what pinned mean is, hey, I'm not actually going to run this node again. N8N is not going to run this again. It is just going to save that data, and it's going to pretend like it ran it again. So let's go ahead and execute workflow. You're going to notice that it almost instantly goes through the pinned data, and it goes into the Google Sheets. That is why that worked. So pinning your data makes a ton of sense. And the reason why this is good too is if you save these guys and the data is pinned, it's going to be fine in production. Like the data is not going to be pinned in production. So this is a really useful tactic for testing your workflows and just making things run a little bit more smoothly. So let's finally talk about the concept of active or inactive. So let's go ahead and save this guy. So if we're using the test trigger, there's actually no concept of active or inactive because the only way to run this guy is to open up the workflow in N8N.com and click execute workflow. So really this kind of is like a fake trigger. What we're going to do is we're going to add a new trigger. It's going to be called a schedule trigger. And schedule trigger, as you can imagine, says, okay, give me a schedule. So maybe every minute, maybe every 15 minutes, maybe every hour, whatever. And I'll run it every 15 minutes, regardless of whether or not you're logged into N8N, regardless of whether or not you actually trigger it. So what we're going to do is, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. We're going to do every minute. So let's go ahead and add that guy. And this is going to be our trigger. And we are going to connect that. Now, if we execute the workflow, in this case, it is just going to go ahead and run that, so even off the schedule. Now, if we click save, this does not enable the trigger yet. So if we go back to personal, we're going to see this is inactive. So this trigger is only going to work. So this clock is only going to be checking if this is active. So let's click active. Now this is active, and it's going to give you a warning here like, hey, this is actually active. So this is going to continue running now every single minute, or it's going to run every minute. I actually don't want this to run every minute, but if we go back into personal, we're going to see this is active. And keep in mind, anytime you're going to have a workflow that's going to need to be called in production, you will need to set it to active. And I will actually point out, I believe the number of active workflows is one of the pricing levers that they have at N8N. So if you need to have a ton of those, you're going to have to pay them more money. That was a pretty big overview of a lot of the basic stuff in N8N. I know I didn't get into a lot of the more advanced nodes. I have a lot of videos up on this channel already that go over nodes like HTTP requests. I go over set, edit fields. Definitely check those out if you have more questions. Feel free to post anything in the comments below. I'll try to respond to all of you guys. But hopefully you liked my whirlwind overview of N8N. I had fun filming it. We'll see you guys later.